It's a pleasure to be here, and let me just work with the last questioner about sleep, because I think it's very important. At my house, one of us sleeps more than 9 hours and the other one sleeps less than 6. So I guess we're both at risk for mortality, but isn't everyone? Reuben Nyman wrote a very beautiful book called Healing Night, and it has many good tips on sleep. Trying to figure out how to turn an answer into something relevant to the topic of nutrition, I thought of turkey. Remember how tired everybody gets when we eat turkey? So there is that amino acid, I forget which one it is, that supposedly makes us sleepy, and is it tryptophan maybe? And many people take that amino acid supplement. Other food items or teas sometimes, Sleepy Time or Nighty Night I've used in the past, and I find them pretty good for sleep. Melatonin, as was mentioned, and then being somebody who investigates the clinical application of cannabis, many of my patients find that cannabidiol, or CBD, which is a non-psychoactive cannabinoid found in the cannabis plant, is very useful for sleep. So now that I answered that question, I'll move on to what I want to talk about, which is nutrition and health and wellness. And what I want to point out is that we're becoming more and more aware of the importance of nutrition. The Journal of the American Medical Association had an article entitled The State of U.S. Health 1990 to 2010, and they reported, which is the pointer? Oh, the computer's the pointer. Oh, okay. Yeah, they showed that the number one cause of both morbidity and mortality in the United States today are dietary risks. Dietary risks has surpassed smoking and high blood pressure as causes of mortality and morbidity in the United States. And dietary risks does not include high body mass index or physical inactivity. And Margaret certainly laid out the importance of physical activity. So if you look at dietary risk, obesity, and physical inactivity, very clear that lifestyle is important in our health and wellness. That article didn't really tell us what dietary risks were, but they referred us to another article in The Lancet, the British medical journal. And they describe dietary risks as diets that are low in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, milk, fiber, calcium, seafood, omega-3 fatty acids, and other polyunsaturated fatty acids. And diets that are high, on the other hand, in red meat, processed meats, sugar-sweetened beverages, trans fatty acids, and sodium. So that's pretty important for us to have a look at and reflect on how what we eat fits into these categories. Are we eating a risky diet or a more healthful diet? And again, as an oncologist, very few people appreciate the significant contribution of diet and obesity and physical inactivity to the development of malignant disease. Most people recognize that smoking is responsible for about a third of malignant diagnoses, but nutrition is probably responsible for almost an equal amount. Probably 30% of all cancers may be related to what we eat. Certainly we know more credibly that 20% of malignancies in women are probably related to being overweight or obese, and 14% of malignancies in men. So this is a big problem, and what we eat really can impact our health. One of the problems with food, as in contrast to tobacco, it's very clear people smoke. We can count how many cigarettes they smoke for how many years, and it can be quantified. For food, it's difficult. Is it what we ate yesterday for lunch that's going to be a problem, or is it what we ate when we were in adolescence, or maybe even more frightening, is it what our mothers ate when we were in utero that actually dictates what our ultimate health is going to be? So what I use in discussing nutrition with my patients and my friends are two pieces of literature that are updated every so often. The American Cancer Society puts out about a 40-page article on diet, nutrition, physical activity, and cancer. And a group called the World Cancer Research Fund, American Institute for Cancer Research, publishes every 10 years an updated 700-page tome which brings together experts from around the world to look at food, nutrition, physical activity, and the prevention of cancer. Actually, one of my dear friends is Robert Bazell, who used to be the NBC News science correspondent, and he said, Donald, if you do anything as an integrative oncologist, can you please get people away from the notion of cancer prevention? Because we really cannot prevent cancer, we can reduce the risk. So many people I see say, I've done everything that I'm supposed to do to prevent cancer and I still got it. And that makes them feel guilty, ashamed, and if they've failed. So we really cannot prevent cancer. I actually did try to get the National Cancer Institute to change their Cancer Prevention Bureau to cancer risk reduction, but they wouldn't listen to me. So anyway, the guidelines start, both the American Cancer Society and the American Institute for Cancer Research, first as the first guideline to be as lean as possible without being underweight. And I think that, you know, it's obvious to all of us that the obesity epidemic has really been mainstreamed in the United States today and really is one of the major causes of the increased cost of healthcare in this country. Up until the year 2010, there was one state that still was not over 20% of their population obese, and that state is Colorado. And Colorado has now joined the rest of the country with having over 20% of the adults obese. And some of these states in the South, as of the latest graph, are now over 35% of the adults are obese. And that's just obese, meaning a body mass index greater than 30. Overweight is another 1/3. So it's now understood that 2/3 of Americans actually are overweight or obese. That's 72 million people. And it's estimated that the increased healthcare costs of people who are overweight or obese is almost $1,500 a year compared to people who are not. And the number of states, unfortunately, that have an obesity rate less than 15%, which was a target from the US Public Health Service, is none. But it's interesting that it's taken so long for the medical establishment to recognize that obesity is actually a disease. When I'm currently attending physician on the medicine service at San Francisco General, and my intern or resident presents a patient to me that's diabetic, hypertensive, hypercholesterol, sleep apnea, and arthritis. And then I walk in the room and I see a person that weighs 300 pounds, and I said, I think you left off their number one problem, because we have basically totally mainstreamed obesity, and it is really a disease and needs to be treated as one. And even in oncology, we recognize, as I said, that this is a contribution to malignancy. It's estimated that obesity-related excesses of these 7 cancers account for 115,000 avoidable deaths in the United States each year. Now, the highest number of obesity-related death is in women with estrogen receptor-positive breast cancer. It's felt that about 20% of estrogen receptor-positive breast cancer is related to being overweight. You'll notice, however, that 50% of uterine cancer is associated with obesity. So even though there are fewer cases, still 1/2 of all uterine cancer is related to obesity. The other malignancies associated with obesity are mainly gastrointestinal, esophagus, pancreas, gallbladder, colorectal, and then 1/4 of the cases of kidney cancer are related to being overweight. Well, how does being overweight cause cancer? body fat secretes chemicals called cytokines that promote inflammation. And Margaret was talking about the importance of inflammation in disease. We now believe that a lot of dementia, cardiac disease, and malignancy really stem from ongoing inflammation. Inflammation is a good thing in a way. When you cut yourself, you want your platelets to clot, and you want to get hot, red, tender, and swollen. Inflammation. That's part of normal healing. But when that goes on inside of us without provocation, it leads to degenerative diseases of aging. So that inflammation impairs the body's immunity. And our immune systems are really programmed to be able to eradicate small cancer cluster cells as they develop. But if our immune systems are encumbered dealing with inflammation, they can't do that work so well. Now, those estrogen-related malignancies, estrogen receptor-positive breast cancer and endometrial cancer, are increased in women who are overweight because fat makes estrogen. We make estrogen in ovaries and in fat as well. So that is the reason that there's such a high rate of those malignancies in women who are overweight. I think probably the most important thing, however, is that being overweight leads to so-called insulin resistance, or the metabolic syndrome, where the body needs to secrete more insulin and more insulin-like growth factor, because the cells become immune to the effect of insulin and glucose isn't metabolized correctly. So insulin and insulin-like growth factor both promote inflammation, and the growth factor is also a growth factor for cancer cells. So that's why already we've tried to look at blocking insulin-like growth factor 1 receptor as a treatment for a number of different cancers. So I really believe that this insulin, the high sugar insulin and insulin-like growth factor are some of the problems that we're dealing with in the diet today. The second guideline says to be physically active for 30 minutes each day. And again, Margaret pointed out the importance of that in aging and health and wellness. The third guideline from the American Institute of Cancer Research used to say limit consumption of energy-dense foods, but they changed that in 2007 and put the header, avoid sugary drinks, which I think is very important. And looking at, I just want to show you that National Geographic has even taken on the sugar issue and recognizes that it's a problem. This is a graph of the intake of refined sugar versus high fructose corn syrup in Americans from 1970 to 2008. Now, I think it would be very interesting to look at what happened since then, and I haven't seen such a graph, but I think high fructose corn syrup has gotten a bad rap, and so that has probably decreased, where refined sugar has likely increased. And the average American today consumes 100 pounds of caloric sweeteners each year. How can anyone consume that much sugar? Well, this is an ad. Many of you might recognize it from when it came out. It antedated zip codes because the bottom address, Chicago, Illinois, doesn't have a zip code. So that means it was out before 1962 when we initiated zip codes. For a better start in life, start cola earlier. How soon is too soon? Not soon enough. Laboratory tests over the last few years have proven that babies who start drinking soda during that early formative period have a much higher chance of gaining acceptance and, quote, fitting in during those awkward preteen and teen years. So do yourself a favor, do your child a favor, start them on a strict regimen of sodas and other sugary carbonated beverages right now for a lifetime of guaranteed happiness. How many of us were brought up with mothers who read this in their Life magazine? And I think it's not a surprise then that the final evolutionary image of man as we know it is carrying a big slurp or whatever you call it. So interestingly and unfortunately, I did go to the microphone in 2007 in Bethesda when they unveiled that, and I said, there are sugary drinks and there's sugary drinks. You can drink Coca-Cola, God forbid, or Tropicana fruit punch, which is probably glucose and high fructose corn syrup, or you can squeeze 3 oranges in the morning. And the response from the podium was, energetically, they're all the same. So I had lunch with Robert Lustig, who's our pediatric endocrinologist who sort of wages the war on sugar. And he told me that if you eat an orange, the fiber slows down the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream. If you squeeze the sugar away from the fiber, it's like drinking a Coca-Cola. So the body responds with increased insulin and insulin-like growth factor. Does it mean I don't squeeze my 3 oranges anymore? I used to do it every day. Now I just do it twice a week. I see a lot of cancer patients who think that they should juice everything, and I say no. Vegetables maybe, but fruit every day juiced, I worry about that. The 4th guideline says eat more of a variety of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and legumes. And unfortunately, the recommended number of servings of fruits and vegetables is 3 to 5 a day. That's the bare minimum. I recommend 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables each day, more vegetables than fruit. And a serving is about what fits in the palm of the hand. Since nobody could understand that, we now say at least 2.5 cups of fruits and vegetables each day, more vegetables than fruit. And you can see here that we as a nation fail. 1/3 of Americans eat 2 or more servings of fruit a day, but only about 1/4 eat 3 or more servings of vegetables. I pretty much eat 3 servings of vegetables for breakfast. So, I think that this is a problem that we fail, and high school students, less than 10%. So the future health of our nation is a problem. And even the august journal Science believes that these plants, fruits and vegetables are possibly contributing to prevention of a number of diseases. And partly that's because antioxidants are abundant in plants and not so much in animal products. So oxygen lives as 2 molecules linked together. That's what we breathe, that's how we live. But when those oxygen molecules separate, they create so-called free radicals or reactive oxygen species, which knock into our DNA, doing damage, leading to aging or cancer. Antioxidants take those free radicals out of circulation so they don't do damage. Again, most of the foods that are rich in antioxidants are plants. That's why I say the diet should be plant-based. What I mean by that is 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables each day, more vegetables than fruits. Personally, I don't believe that vegetarianism or veganism are the healthiest diets for us. I believe we need to have a little animal fat and a little animal protein. I know many people are quite healthy, and surveys show that those who are vegetarian or vegan do have greater health benefits with cardiovascular disease, etc. But interestingly, there is not any society that has veganism traditionally as their diet that has survived. So I tell and recommend to my patients and my friends that the diet be organic, plant-based, antioxidant-rich, anti-inflammatory whole foods. And I say organic for a number of reasons. First of all, we're not really meant to have those chemicals, pesticides, fertilizers, herbicides in our body. But second of all, a plant that's grown outdoors organically needs to fight to protect itself from other plants, birds and insects, and the sunshine. And the only way a plant knows how to protect itself is by making chemicals. Turns out those chemicals that the plant makes to protect itself are the ones that benefit us. So if we're going to let food be our medicine and medicine be our food, organic is much more potent than conventional. How many people shop organic? It's more expensive, and I know, working at San Francisco General Hospital, that the organic apple that I just ate after lunch that I eat every day costs about as much as a double cheeseburger, French fries, and a Coke. So no wonder so much of America is sick and malnourished, because we subsidize the wrong foods in this country. So, although the British have done a number of studies looking at conventional versus organic produce and say there's no difference in macronutrients, fat, protein, and carbohydrates, they do conclude that they are richer in vitamins and the so-called micronutrients or the phytonutrients that I believe are important for fighting cancer and maintaining our health. So organic, I think, is the way to go. Now, honing down on which fruits and vegetables are the most potent, I believe that soy foods and flaxseed, which are plant estrogens, but not potent phytoestrogens, they're not as potent as a woman's own estrogen or even estrogen made by men, are important foods to be consumed throughout the lifespan. My favorite vegetables are the cruciferous vegetables. Flowers grow in the shape of a crucifix. Broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts jump to mind, but there are also cruciferous roots and green leafies that are cruciferous. Cabbage, kale, collard greens, bok choy, arugula. All of these contain at least two important chemicals. One is sulforaphane called indole-3-carbinol, which is so potent at reducing the risk of cancer that we've started to look at it as chemotherapy. Another one is a chemical called DIM, D-I-M, which changes a woman's estrogen from the type that fuels estrogen-responsive tumors to the type that doesn't. So again, I believe we can never eat enough cruciferous vegetables, and for breakfast, I eat broccoli, tofu, and rice. My other breakfast is mochi, which is just pounded rice, and I puff it up and put almond butter on it and a sweet potato on top of that, because orange yellow vegetables are also good for you. When I travel, obviously I can't do my mochi or my broccoli tofu, so what I eat is muesli, because muesli is the only cereal I can find that doesn't have added sugar, and since I don't do dairy, I take Rice Dream, or now I have to buy it where I land because TSA, even with a letter from my doctor, won't let me carry 8 ounces of Rice Dream. They always want me to open it up. I said, well, how am I going to open it up and ride on an airplane and Rice Dream flying all over the place? Anyway, season with ginger, garlic, onions, and turmeric. And another sort of one of my trademarks is my green tea. I'm always seen with a cup of green tea. I drink 5 cups of green tea each day. The potent polyphenol in green tea, I believe, is second only to cruciferous vegetables chemicals in decreasing the risk of cancer. Many studies have shown, and I think I might have one here, the benefits of green tea. Tea is the name of the beverage brewed from the Chinese camellia, or the Camellia sinensis. And it's graded on how oxidized the leaf is before the beverage is brewed. White, green, oolong, black, and pu'er. And the only two that have the cancer-fighting chemicals actually are white and green. And people say, well, I try to stay away from caffeine. Well, if you're brewing your tea, well, if you buy decaffeinated green tea, I think it removes some of the potent cancer-fighting chemicals. So if you're brewing your tea in a bag, brew it for 2 minutes and dump out the tea, and then rebrew the bag, because most of the caffeine comes out in the first 2 minutes. So I mentioned sulforaphane in broccoli, and studies suggest that sulforaphane can inhibit some of the pathways that cause cancer and also suppress receptor for androgen, which are male hormone signaling. So they did a study in 20 men with prostate cancer whose PSA levels were rising despite the fact that they had been treated for their cancer with surgery or radiation, and they gave them that chemical from broccoli, sulforaphane, 200 micromoles a day. And what they found in the 16 patients who completed the study was sort of a suggestion that their PSA levels dropped and the time for the PSA levels to prolong increased, which suggested that it was having some benefit. But interestingly, I read a newspaper article with the gentleman who did the study, and he said the compound we use is limited by not having been studied first in animals to see what its toxicities are, and groups are working on developing a synthetic version of this. And there are also over-the-counter preparations, but but he's not familiar. I say eat broccoli, just eat broccoli, and forget about thinking that you can take a capsule that has these wonderful foods in them and get the same health benefit. So eat broccoli. This is a study. This is one of the reasons that we get a little bit confused about dietary advice for health and wellness. This is a study in 200,000 men and women in Hawaii and California, followed for 7 years, who completed questionnaires very detailed on their dietary habits. And they were looking for what things increase or decrease the risk of developing colorectal cancer. And over the course of the 7 years, 2,000 out of the 200,000 patients developed colorectal cancer. And in men, they found that high levels of fruit and vegetable were associated with a lower risk across all the 5 ethnic groups studied, about a 25% reduction in the risk with higher fruits and vegetables. However, for women, there was no decreased risk for higher fruits and vegetables. So why should it be different between men and women eating fruits and vegetables and the risk of colon cancer? And I don't have an answer for that question, but this is what makes a lot of my colleagues who are oncologists who want strict, hard data confused with these dietary recommendations, because sometimes they're a little bit conflicting. So I mentioned green tea because I'm a big fan. So in animals, green tea protects against many different types of cancer. And in the Iowa Women's Health Study, tea intake was associated with a lower incidence of cancer of the digestive tract. Chinese men drinking green tea in China have half the risk of developing stomach and esophageal cancer, which is a huge problem in Asia, probably because of the way they use salt to preserve and pickle foods, which is damaging to the mucosa of the esophagus and the stomach. So Chinese drinking men have half the risk of stomach and esophageal cancer and a lower risk of prostate cancer as well. But I just want to say that it's not one food alone. The whole diet is synergistic. That's why we look at that Mediterranean diet. It's not just olive oil, it's not just fish, it's not one food alone. The Okinawa diet also. This is a study that was done in China looking at 1,000 women with breast cancer and 1,000 controls. And they looked at intake of mushrooms. And I just want to show you this because of the synergy between the mushrooms and the green tea. The risk of developing breast cancer was reduced in women who ate both fresh mushrooms and dried mushrooms, mostly white buttons and shiitakes. But if they ate the mushrooms in conjunction with green tea, the risk was decreased even further to an 80 to 90% lower risk compared to women who did not eat mushrooms and drink green tea. So very significant reduction. So I'm a big fan of mushrooms as medicine, and people say, well, how could mushrooms be medicine? Well, we live in a fungophobic society. We fear mushrooms. We associate them with witches and death and decay. But Asian cultures embrace mushrooms, and you know, mushrooms have been used in culinary and medicinal fashions for years. And I always say, you can eat a mushroom and have a psychedelic experience, or you can eat a mushroom and die, so obviously they have biologic activity. One thing I did want to point out, however, is that our good friend, the white button mushroom, actually contains a cancer-causing compound. So all mushrooms need to be cooked. No mushroom should be eaten raw. So white buttons, their brown cousins, the crimini, and their giant cousins, the portobello, all need to be cooked. They contain something called agaritine, which is related to hydrazine, which is in rocket fuel, and it's not good for you. It's partially deactivated with heating, so cooking the mushrooms is okay. White buttons, their brown cousins, the crimini, and their giant cousins, the portobello, may also have some aromatase inhibitor activity, so good mushrooms for postmenopausal women with breast cancer. Better edible mushrooms are shiitake, maitake, and enoki, the ones that are in miso soup, because these mushrooms are immune enhancing and perhaps have some direct anti-cancer activity. Well, how could mushrooms enhance the immune system? The cell wall of a mushroom sort of mimics the cell wall of a bacteria. So when we ingest mushrooms, our body is thinking that we're getting invaded by bacteria, and it mounts a non-specific immune response, which in times can be very helpful for us. Another plant that I like that we need to consume more of is turmeric. The suggestion that turmeric had medicinal value came when people started looking at India, which is a huge country and has very low rates of both dementia and cancer. And Indians consume a significant amount of turmeric, quite a bit more than we do in our diet. And it's been suggested that turmeric has many properties. I myself take it for my arthritis. It's anti-inflammatory, and it also has these particular anti-cancer activities. So turmeric is a good thing. Meat. So the average American will have bacon and eggs for breakfast, hamburger and fries for lunch, and steak and potatoes for dinner. That's a bit too much meat, I think. The guidelines from the American Institute for Cancer Research, World Cancer Research Fund say limit consumption of red meat, beef, pork, and lamb, and avoid processed meats. Now, avoid is a huge word, and processed meats, what's that? Bacon, salami, bologna, hot dogs, ham, all of those processed meats. And you know, the reason they say that is because there is this linear relationship between red meat consumption and the risk of colon cancer. Now, this is an old slide from '95, so that New Zealand and the United States have the highest rates, but now these two have been replaced by Japan and the Czech Republic because of changes in wealth in the Czech Republic and the changes in eating habits in Japan. So it is totally a linear relationship between consumption of red meat and the development of colorectal cancer. Now, how could this lovely bucolic creature be contributing to ill health? Well, this is how those creatures are raised for our consumption. And the color that's missing in this picture is green. There's no green there. And what's that white powder in the middle of the road? I don't know, but it's in your meat and dairy. So one of the problems is that we feed these animals things that they can't digest. And instead of making fat that's rich in omega-3 fatty acids, they make fats that are rich in omega-6 fatty acids. So omega-6 fatty acids, again, promote platelets clumping and promote inflammation. So if you cut yourself or have surgery, you need to have omega-6 because you want your platelets to clump and you want red, hot, tender, and swollen so you heal. Omega-3, on the other hand, dissolve platelet clots and are anti-inflammatory. Well, the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 in our diet has changed dramatically over the past 50 years. This is a slide from my friend David Servan-Schreiber, who was French, and so he spells pork differently, and I couldn't correct it on his slide. But this shows you in 1960, we had a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 in our foodstuffs of about 2 to 1, and that has dramatically changed, and perhaps most dramatically for eggs. Chicken and eggs are probably the most inflammation-promoting foods out there. And it's not only because of what we feed the animals, but they're very rich in something called arachidonic acid, which is the chemical precursors of prostaglandins, the mediators of inflammation. So I eat chicken, but it's organic. Personally, I only eat one egg a year at Passover when we dip it in salt water because eggs don't agree with me. But if you're eating eggs, they need to be organic omega-3 eggs. Now, does it make a difference in people who already have cancer, for example, to change their diet? This was a very interesting study that was conducted at UCLA, and they looked at 48 men who were going to have their prostates removed for prostate cancer. And one group got assigned to a low-fat diet with only 15% of the calories from fat, and they were supplemented with 5 grams a day of fish oil, which is a mighty dose of fish oil, I'll tell you, which brought their omega-6 to omega-3 ratio back to 2 to 1, which is what we think it used to be. Or the other group got the control Western diet, which is 40% of calories from fat and an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of 15 to 1. And food was prepared for them and brought to their homes for 4 to 6 weeks before their surgery by chefs at UCLA. Unfortunately, they chose serum insulin-like growth factor 1 as the marker that they wanted to see if it was different between the two groups. And they saw no difference in serum insulin-like growth factor 1. But the men in the low-fat, high omega-3 group had lower omega-6 to omega-3 ratios in their blood and in their prostate gland. Their prostates were smaller, both the benign and the cancerous parts, and the malignant cells were slower to divide. Also, the blood from the men eating the low-fat diet, when mixed with prostate cancer cells in the test tube, inhibited those cells more than men in the control group. So omega-3 fatty acids, which are found in deep cold water fish, salmon, black cod, albacore tuna, herring, mackerel, and sardine, are good for us. And since we're not going to eat those fish every day, I think an omega-3 supplement is appropriate. But it's not just the omega-3s that are bad in meat. Meat has a lot of so-called heme iron. I see a lot of cancer patients say, well, I'm anemic, so I'm taking iron. Iron feeds cancer. If you're not iron deficient, you shouldn't be taking iron or a multivitamin that has iron, and it's one of the reasons that red meat is actually not as good for us. Nitrates from processed meat are positively associated with the risk of colorectal cancer. And then unfortunately for those of us Americans who like to barbecue, burnt flesh produces heterocyclic amines, and they are also associated with colon cancer, but not rectal cancer. I'll have the half-pound double deluxe bacon steer burger, please. You want chemotherapy with that? So this is another huge study looking at 525,000 Americans followed for over 6 years, looking to see what put them at risk for development of pancreatic cancer, one of my least favorite of all. The pancreatic cancer risk was directly related to the intake of saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and the strongest associations for saturated fat were from animal sources. Specifically, intakes from red meat and dairy products were both associated with increased risk. Well, now I'm treading on thin ice, I know, because Got Milk is a big campaign in this country, and we all think milk is right there next to apple pie. Well, dairy products do contain some things that are probably healthy for us in some extent, but there's no other animal that drinks another species' milk. But there's no animal that drives a car or goes to college either, so that's not a very good argument. But no animal drinks milk after they've been weaned. And by the age of 3 or 4, our ability to digest the sugars and the proteins in dairy decreases, just like it does in other animal species. So we talk about lactose intolerance as if it's a disease or a disorder, when in fact it's the norm. And as Barbara Kingsolver, of all people, teaches us that the ability to digest lactose is actually a genetic mutation on the second chromosome, found mainly in Scandinavians who needed to digest reindeer milk in times of freeze. The rest of us are lactose intolerant. So if you need a dairy product, butter is probably one of the best because it's mainly fat, or if you love your milk, yogurt or kefir, because the sugars and the proteins have been altered by the bacteria, are probably okay as long as they're not artificially flavored, artificially sweetened, or with added sugar. And this shows that certainly some populations are even more lactose intolerant than others, including specifically Asians in the United States, where lactose intolerance is basically universal. There are other positive associations with dairy intake other than just pancreatic cancer, prostate, ovarian, and breast, although it seems to be protective perhaps in colorectal cancer, bladder may be associated, and ovarian. So with all this, my standard recommendations are to increase plant-based foods, whole grains. Brown rice is better than white rice, but if you like white rice, jasmine and basmati are probably better than sushi rice, Uncle Ben's, or traditional Chinese rice. Millet and quinoa are good grains. Bread should be whole grain, not whole wheat. Increase intake of fruits, particularly heavily pigmented fruits. The berries, very potent antioxidant. They must be organic because they're like sponges for toxins, but they can be frozen. And then I've already extolled the benefits of cruciferous vegetables. Decrease animal fats, dairy, red and processed meats. Poultry should be organic. Increase consumption of marine fatty acids, the particularly omega-3s. Decrease refined carbohydrates, sugar, white flour, white rice, except jasmine and basmati. Season liberally with ginger, garlic, onions, and turmeric. The Mediterranean spices, basil, oregano, thyme, and rosemary are also very good for us. And when you think of beverages, think Christmas, green and white. So green tea and red wine. Red wine because it has resveratrol, which is something that is felt to be a life-prolonging agent. Medicine attending at San Francisco General, I walked into a patient's room. She was eating breakfast. She had a cup of coffee, a thing of milk, a soda, and orange juice. And I asked my team, which is the healthiest beverage on this patient's tray? And the answer probably is the coffee. Because coffee is probably good for the brain and the heart. It doesn't have particular anti-cancer properties. Sometimes it's felt to increase the risk of cancer. I remember when they thought it increased pancreatic cancer. Now it seems to decrease the risk of breast cancer. I don't know. But on her tray, that was it. The next day we walked in, she had the soda, the orange juice, and the milk. I said, "Where's your coffee?" She said, "I already drank it." So that was good. So I hope this gives you some food for thought, no, pardon the pun. And I did want to share with you this quote: "The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest his patients in the care of the human body, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease." Said by a few years ago, right? So thank you very much for your attention, and eat well. Okay. I have time for questions. As long as somebody uses a microphone, I'll be able to hear you. I think you said something about, can you season your iced tea with Splenda?
Yeah.
You know, I grew up during the time when everybody was using saccharin, and then they took saccharin off the market because it caused bladder cancer. I don't trust these artificial sweeteners. If you're going to use an artificial sweetener or a sweetener, stevia is probably the best. Andy Weil says agave nectar, but I fear agave nectar is contaminated with high fructose corn syrup. So stevia probably the best. My resident currently was drinking low-calorie or sugar-free soft drinks, and I said, look at that sweetener and Google it and see that it causes cancer in animals, but we're allowed to drink it. Doesn't make sense to me. Yeah.
Okay, my question is it good for a little girl to have a lot of soy food?
So soy I did have on my list of recommended foods. Soy has gotten a bad rap because people think it's an estrogen. It's a very weak estrogen. Soy intake during adolescence is why Asians living in Asia eating an Asian diet have less breast and prostate cancer when they become adults. So soy is good, and soy, even in women with estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, decreases the risk of recurrence if women have one serving of a whole soy food a day. So a whole soy food is soybean, soy milk, tofu, tempeh, or miso, and not soy cheese, soy turkey, and soy hot dogs, because those are just heavily processed foods. Yes?
Is it better to have food, the vegetables you mentioned, raw or cooked?
Is it better to have the vegetables raw or cooked? There is this whole raw movement that says that when we cook the vegetables, we destroy their enzymes. And I always say, we have our own enzymes, we don't need the plant's enzymes. So there are some situations where I'm wrong. For example, broccoli, crushing the broccoli sets off an enzymatic reaction that creates the more potent cancer-fighting chemical. If you cook the broccoli, you inhibit that enzyme. But I still think if you cook broccoli quickly, that you still get the anti-cancer benefits. When I say quickly, I don't make broccoli like my mother in Cleveland made when it became that gray-brown color. If it's green, if you blanch it, parboil it, stir-fry it, it's fine. Another vegetable that requires crushing raw to be most potent is garlic. So garlic, crush it, and then you can cook it, because that enzymatic reaction that you're going to shut off when you heat it will take place if you chop it up first and let it sit there for a while. So I think, and then most of the other vegetables need to be cooked to really release the beneficial ingredients. So you can eat raw food, but you don't have to only eat raw food. The only time I saw a benefit to raw versus cooked in bladder cancer, they feel that there's a reduction of the rate of bladder cancer in people eating raw broccoli compared to cooked. But that's the only study I've shown that, or I've seen that's shown any benefit of something raw. Yep.
I only eat cheese and fish. Should I throw out the cheese?
Well, I'm not going to tell you what to do. It's a dairy product, but some people eat dairy products and live to be whatever. But if we're intolerant of it, I feel that it creates inflammation in our gut, and that decreases our immunity and leads to all sorts of other problems. I would say, why don't you stop for 3 weeks and see if you feel any different? So many of my patients come back and say, oh my God, I lost 5 pounds without trying and I feel so much more energetic. Plus my bowels have changed significantly.
Over here.
Where am I? Okay.
I've read that calcium inhibits the absorption of iron. Do you recommend not combining them?
You're sure it's calcium and not vitamin C? I haven't heard that about calcium. You mean as foodstuffs or as supplements?
As foodstuffs. I might be wrong about that, but I always thought it was calcium.
I'm not aware of that. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
And so I've got to stop putting mushrooms on my salad, raw mushrooms on my salad?
Well, it's funny because we have every month our lunch catered at San Francisco General in the Oncology Division, and my assistant the other day, I got there before everybody else, and she was picking all the raw mushrooms out of the salad. She said, I told them we don't eat raw mushrooms. Yeah, all mushrooms need to be cooked.
In the back here.
Hi, I'm on blood thinners, and I've been told that I should not drink green tea.
You're on what?
Blood thinners.
Yeah, lemon tea. Well, I tell people, first of all, I'm not doing individual consults here on anybody's health problems, but the fear is that blood thinner, particularly if it's Coumadin, it decreases vitamin K, and tea and many green leafy vegetables are very rich in vitamin K. I tell my patients, rather than deprive yourself of healthy food, tell your doctor to monitor the dose of your blood thinner. So if you need more, you'll take more, rather than deprive yourself of healthy nutrition.
Okay, we have time for one more right here.
Yes. Now that everybody was talking about coconut oil, that's have a trans fat. Is that good to
Coconut oil is a trans fat, but it's a plant trans fat and not an animal trans fat. And it is something I recommend to my patients with cancer who have weight loss to use coconut oil, coconut milk-based smoothies as opposed to, it's a good trans fat. Not everything is black and white. All right, thank you for your attention.